What you know, Alibis. Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. It is Wednesday, February 19th. Y'all, I have to say, this was the craziest day in court I have ever sat through, hands down. We are going to jump into it. But first, if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe, like the video, share it with your friends, and you can click that little bell icon if you want notifications of when I post new content. Today, for example, lots of YouTube shorts because John Melo was arrested at 1:30 today in connection to Christina Parcells' murder, pretty much based on testimony Zachary Hughes gave today when he was on the stand. So let's jump into his testimony and the craziness that ensued throughout. He gets on the stand and tells that he is 32 years old, he's not married, and has 5 brothers and sisters, 1 biological sibling, and the rest were adopted. At one point, he had 6 siblings. He was born in California, and the family moved to Southwest Virginia when he was 11. He learned he had an aptitude for music when he was about 4 or 5 years old, so his parents bought him a piano. He said he had a great childhood, great parents, grew up in a Christian household, raised with good values, good morals, and the importance of service to others. When he was 9 years old, he started taking piano lessons with his pastor's daughter. His family really wanted him to play hymns and devotions. They moved to a 3.5-acre farm. They wanted to raise farm animals and have the kids work on the farm to be close to nature, and also so the kids would understand the value of hard work. In 2005, the family adopted 5 children from Russia. The family saw photos of these kids and their hearts just went out to them. He said that in the photo, their hair had been shaved due to lice. There were 3 girls and 2 boys. And after a lot of prayer and discussion, the family decided to adopt them because Zack said if they didn't, who would? The oldest child that was adopted was 10, and her name was Grace. The youngest was 18 months. When Zack was 15 or 16, they moved to Travelers Rest, South Carolina. It's maybe a 15-20-minute drive to downtown Greenville, just on the outskirts. Great little town. Love going up there for good food and some good shopping. When Zack was 14 or 15, he was practicing piano about 6 to 8 hours a day, and he knew he wanted to pursue music as his career. When Zack was practicing, it was typically late night into the early morning hours. So his dad built a soundproof garage so that he wouldn't disturb the neighbors. When he was in high school, he participated in a lot of regional music festivals and won several of those. He was in an international competition and won that. So he was invited to perform with the South Carolina Philharmonic Orchestra. For college, he applied to 5 different conservatories in the U.S. and was accepted to 3, but ultimately decided to go to Juilliard in Manhattan. There was a 7.2% acceptance rate, and he was one of them. He had a scholarship as well as financial aid. He participated in an international music festival in Kyoto, Japan. It consists of music students from all over the world. This music festival has a relationship with Juilliard, and Zack was selected to represent the United States at this event. There were only 15 or 20 students worldwide who were selected, and he was the only one from the United States. He graduated Juilliard in May of 2015 with a bachelor's of music and piano performance. After graduation, he did some freelancing, solo concerts, worked at some restaurants, and he also taught piano. In 2017, the Knoxville Symphony offered him a spot as a principal keyboardist. He would play piano, keyboard, and his employment ended there in 2018. From there, he decided to enlist in the Marine Corps. He talked to his recruiter where they just asked questions to help determine your placement. Since he had a bachelor's degree, he was eligible for officer candidate school, and he took that opportunity. It's a rigorous selection process, and he was working with the recruiter to train to just get ready. Marine personnel tried to push him to go into the Marine Corps band, and he did not want to do that. He said that wasn't why he joined. He actually wanted to do infantry. The physical fitness test was a max of 300 points and he scored 294. But he didn't complete officer candidate school. He was dropped in the third week due to level 3 stress fractures in both legs. He was in the top 3% of his class out of 400. His superior wanted him to come home, heal up, and come back. He came back home to Traveler's Rest while he was healing, and this was in late January of 2019. He was given the opportunity to play this inaugural concert with a new, very expensive piano that was gifted to a local Unitarian church. And the Wynn family was involved in this. He was 6 months out of practice and thought maybe he wouldn't, but ultimately decided that he would play. And he played that piano in June of 2019. He was paid for that performance, and the concert was very well received. He developed a friendship with the Wynn family, and he explained Beethoven was his favorite composer. And in 2020, it was Beethoven's 200th birthday. Zack had a dream that he had put off for a long time of playing all 32 sonatas, and he shared that dream with the Wynns. They were really excited about the idea, and he knew that the sonatas would take up a lot of time and knew that he had the support from the Wynns and the church. So he decided to focus on this instead of returning back into the Marine Corps when he healed up. He explained the 32 sonatas are over 600 pages of music, and from beginning to end, it would take between 11 to 12 hours to perform all of them. And not many have been able to do this. He was also going to do this from memory. January 2020 was when those sonata performances were going to start at the church. He ended up living with the Wynns because they had a piano that he could practice on. The first show was in January of 2020, and it was a donation-based concert. Zack wanted to split the profits with the church 50-50. It was very well received, and the first concert, he played 3 sonatas. The next concert was February of 2020, and he performed 2. The third performance was in March, and he did 3. But the fourth concert in April didn't happen due to COVID. Up until April, he had done a fifth to a quarter of those sonatas. In the meantime, he was also working as a server in downtown Greenville and took work on laying brick and painting houses with his dad. Due to COVID, he decided that he would perform outside. So he saved money and bought the best electronic keyboard on the market since it was portable, but also he needed something that would do justice to the materials he wanted to play. And he played on the streets of downtown Greenville several times a week, beginning in the summer of 2020. He was frequently in front of a restaurant called Spill the Beans at Falls Park. My connection to this case is that I actually met Zack while he was outside playing in downtown, spoke to him a bit. He was very articulate, well-mannered, and super talented. In August of 2020, he was performing and John Melo introduced himself and his daughter, who was 8 at the time. Mello asked if he took requests, and his daughter's favorite song was Claire de Lune. Zack said he was super impressed. She was very caught up in the music when he was playing, and it made a big impression on him. John Melo gave him a business card, and Zack contacted him by email. He followed up because he got the impression from what he said, and his card indicated that he was in the rock and roll music world. He said Mello was charismatic and he thought it would be fun to meet for coffee. They met up 6 or 7 times, and it was always with his daughter, with the exception of one time. He said they would get coffee. He would see them downtown. They would get pizza. They would go to art galleries, and he was really impressed with the child. She was very special, mature, held her own with adults. She was cultured, well-traveled, and she told Zack about trips her and her dad had taken. He thought she was a very loved child and that Mello did a really good job raising her, and she was a happy, healthy kid. On October 2nd of 2020, which is Zack's birthday, the child had visitation with her mom, Christina, and he met up with John. He said that on the night of his birthday, he and John went to bars, got dinner, and ended the night getting tacos at a place not far from my house where there's a lot of taco trucks, best you'll find anywhere. He said at the beginning of the night, John was very festive, but by the end of the night, his mood had changed drastically. He was distraught, little concerned, and told Zack he was worried about his daughter when she was with her mother, and essentially said whenever Christina had visitation, he couldn't rest easy until his daughter was back. He didn't trust Christina, didn't think she was responsible, and was worried that she may hurt the child. The child and the mom were actually on a road trip to see family down south, and the child was due back in the next couple of days. When she returned, John and the child were going to Italy. Zack thought it was great. He knew John's parents were Italian, and he thought it would be good for the child to have the experience of going over there. And he said he was excited for the both of them. In October of 2020, Zack was performing downtown and talking with someone who curated a museum of historic instruments. They talked about revamping the Beethoven project Zack started working on at the beginning of the year, that they would record them and then eliminate the issue of gatherings with COVID. By the way, these are still on Zack's YouTube page. He said, as a classical musician, you play a piece in the past, but you have to retrain. So he would relearn the music, and with the recording schedule, he would commit to once a week that he would record a sonata and then go through 2021 until they were all done. The first recording was set for January of 2021. He said some of those are short, 12 minutes, some are longer, like 45 minutes. So between October of 2020 and April of 2021, he wasn't talking to John as much and said he was somewhat relieved not to bump into John downtown because John would always want to hang out and Zack really didn't always have the time. But in April of 2021, he started talking to John more. John let Zack know Christina had been doing things in family court to try to get the daughter back. John was worried she may succeed. So he sent a message to Zack saying that they took her. What am I going to do? And John began to explain in more detail his concerns about Christina having their daughter. Zack found himself relieved to have this distance from John, but was becoming increasingly concerned about the child himself. Zack said he had a sense of responsibility to help John in the custody battle for the sake of the child. So he and John communicated daily. Zack said he was just trying to help him. He needed an attorney here in Greenville for family court, so Zack called attorneys to help John and the child out. He also cleaned John's house, which had been rented out and had been trashed. Zack was the one that hired the witness that testified last week because John needed to be able to show the family court he had a safe place for the child to live. John told Zack in detail about his concerns with Christina. And to understand, Zack tells the jury about his oldest adopted sibling, Grace. There was an objection, and the state says he's going to say that his siblings were abused in Russia, and that's a backdoor way to bring in the child abuse materials. The judge wouldn't allow that line of questioning due to his prior ruling, and the judge told Zack that he can't talk about the abuse of his siblings. The jury was sent out for that. They came back, and Zack said, I don't say this lightly, but Grace was the most vile human being I've ever met. She was 10 when she came into our life. He said the Russian government told the family nothing about these kids. Zack said she is an affectionless psychopath, amoral, no sense of right or wrong. Her emotional compass was non-existent. She was dead inside, a master manipulator. She would lie at the drop of a hat for personal gain or just for fun. And she would tell horrible stories just to get a rise out of people. What he learned about those personalities stuck with him. He said he had never heard another person described like this. He said she was like a vampire who would suck the goodness out of people around her. She would fake emotions to elicit a sympathetic response. And if she was accused of something, she would cry and beg you to believe her. And if you had proof of what she had done, she would change and give you this look. But she would always reel them back in because they wanted to believe that she would change and that there's redemption for her. But she knew that and would use that to regain trust only to betray it again, and it would be worse than the first time. He said this happened dozens of times and it created a lot of strife in their home and it drove a wedge between the parents. He said she was incredibly intelligent, but also evil. And if you trust people like that, you're going to get hurt. It took years, but he forgave her, but said he would never trust her. He said most people have not met someone like her. He said we see them in documentaries on Netflix, but they don't exist in our world. But it could be your neighbor or someone you have to look after your kids. He told the jury, knowing this is crucial for you to know how it affected what John was telling me about Christina, her personality and her character. And John would tell Zack, I know you're not going to believe me and you're going to think I'm exaggerating. And he said, John is a big storyteller, but point by point, everything he explained about Christina to Zack was the same as his sister. Master manipulator, can lie very easily, charming, intelligent, and talented. But her biggest fault is that she was lazy and had this arrogance that was born out of the fact she knew she never had to work too hard in life and could sacrifice trust by telling lies that could easily be found out, but knew she could easily reel someone back in. Zack said, I lived this behavior and I knew what he meant. John did not know about Zack's sister, and people usually don't get what you're talking about when you're talking about somebody like this. But he knew John Melo couldn't just invent this. It was too familiar to him. And he said, I was right to believe him. Grace and Christina, by correlation, she had an addiction to stealing or sucker punching siblings, and she would recruit her younger siblings to do things for her. Grace would steal things from the parents' room, and she was a corrupting influence on anyone around her. Zack knew there was an incredible danger that the child could become her mom if she was left in her custody. Now, here we go. The first time, the facts have shown I was right. The judge tells the jury to disregard that statement. Ultimately, Grace was removed from their family. She had been sent to different homes around the country, and she was the first to get expelled from some of these schools. They realized she would be a physical danger to the family, and Zack told that he found a diary where she fantasized about gouging out his parents' eyes and killing them. He said that Grace had psychotic delusions of violence and grandeur, and so the family called DSS to have them remove Grace from their home. The defense asked Zack, John told you things about Christina. Did he give you other information about Christina which formed your opinion of her? And Zack said things like 3 very pertinent collections of information. The first, the photos I sent in the mailings. There were 2 ads from escort websites connected to those photos. He said John told me they were prostitution ads from her previous career as a prostitute. Zack knew the photos were proof, and he said, I don't say it to shame. They weren't cute, intimate photos you would send someone you were dating. They were crude. The look in her eyes was vacant and had a look of, I can get you to do what I want you to do. He said it reminded him of his sister, and also he mentions a deposition that Christina gave in 2016. There was an objection, and the jury was sent out. They bring the jury back in, and he said after he read the deposition from family court of Christina's, he believed the things she admitted to and that she had a history of manipulating men for money and admitted to being in pornographic movies, used sugar daddy for me to get with older, wealthy men. She said she was disinterested in having kids, which is why she gave John custody of their daughter. They talk about Alex Fields, the firefighter that she propositioned for sex and drugs. And when John posted that ad on Craigslist asking for any information about Caroline Warren, aka Christina Parcell, and posted those photos, Alex responded, and they have Zack read from that deposition. And this was from Alex Fields. He said, I was at Hall's Chop House in downtown when a woman approached and said hello and asked if I was looking for a date. She said we wouldn't be rushed at all. And I said no when she offered me narcotics. He said there's no doubt that this was the woman he saw John Melo post on Craigslist. Zack said, "You heard the testimony from Dan Bevel, and he testified he had met Christina in an official capacity before he investigated the letters that he and John sent out." The defense asked Zack, "So John shared information with you about interactions he had with Christina before." There is an objection and the jury is sent out. And the judge asks, "What's the relevance?" And the defense says what his state of mind was and what he knew about the dynamic that was going on. So the jury comes back in and they kind of move on. "You said John provided information related to his concerns about Christina in conjunction with the child." So they moved to May of 2021. Zack and John were still communicating about this whole situation. Given the grave concerns John had since the child was in Christina's custody, and he was worried Bradley Post was a pedophile. So John asked him to mail off the nude photos. So there's an objection, but get this, and this is part of the reason John Melo was arrested today. John Melo asked Zack if he would kill Christina for $5,000. Zack said no. There was a second offer in which John Melo asked Zack if he was convinced the child was in danger, would you kill her for $10,000? Zack said no amount of money would make him do this. The only way he would consider taking action is if he was absolutely convinced the child was in danger, and the only way to get the child out of danger would be to take Christina's life. Zack was working on these sonatas and needed a break. He was playing on the Wynn's front lawn for donations, and he and John were talking daily at this point, mostly about the child. And they also talked about what Zack was up to with the sonatas. John told him, "It's a music term. You have a monkey on your back and you need to take a break and come to Italy." So Zack took him up on it. He joined Mello in Italy in a town not far from Venice. He went the last days of May or the first days of June 2021. Zack paid for his own travel and he stayed at John's apartment. He said he stayed in Italy 3 to 4 weeks. Zack said he saw the child on FaceTime 2 times a week in a court-ordered FaceTime. Zack heard the conversations and could see her face, and once he did say hi to her. Mello told Zack that Christina is killing my little girl. There's no spark in her eyes. And Zack said when he saw the child, she wasn't the same kid he knew when he was in Greenville. She had put on 20 pounds in a very short amount of time. And at 8 years old, it was a big difference. He noticed a change in her demeanor, her spirit. She seemed depressed and the spunk was gone. John would ask how she was and she would try to smile and say she's okay, but it was clear she didn't want John to worry about her. He said it reminded him of himself with the situation with his adopted sister, Grace. You internalize things, and the child was trying to be stronger than she should be at that age because she was being tortured and she was drowning. And he said when John Melo said the spark was gone out of her eyes, he was correct. He left Italy in June of 21 and came back to Greenville. And based on everything he was aware of, he sent those mailers out. He said Christina put that stuff out publicly. He wanted parents to know that their kids were not safe around her or Bradley Post, and wanted different people like the Guardian ad litem and the police to have access to this information to show Christina was a danger to her child and other kids. He said he also sent these out for social pressure. Christina had a facade, and he was hoping it wouldn't be worth it for people to see her for what she was in exchange to fight to have her daughter. The mailers did not alleviate Zack's concern. Christina and Bradley Post dug their heels in deeper. He learned of a video call John had with the child who was in Greenville at that time. And at the end of the call, Christina turned the phone to her face, and she was more angry than John said he had ever seen her. She slid her finger across her throat in a perceived threat to Mello about the mailers. John sent Zack an email he got from someone in a biker community and said Bradley Post tried to be in that community. And this acquaintance of John's said that Bradley Post had been asking others to put the hurt on Mello, and it would be for a lot of money. There was an objection. It was sustained. They move on to an affidavit that Zack wrote and had notarized and left with Mello's family court attorney at the time. That was on September 21st of 2021. He said at that point he was extremely concerned about the danger the child was in and wanted to tell the family court his opinion and his observations so they would consider sending the child back to John Melo. He said that didn't alleviate his concerns either. The end of September to the beginning of October of 2021, just shortly before the murder, Zack called CPS and said he saw the child being verbally and physically abused by her mother. He admitted he made it all up because he wanted to give the child a way to talk to DSS and tell them that her mother was sexually abusing her. There's an objection that's sustained. This is really the first time he just got it out. I will say the jury looked stunned. They sort of looked at each other, looked out at all of us sitting there, kind of moved uncomfortably in their seats, but they were shocked to hear that come out. They move on. Zack said nothing was done. He had DSS interaction with his sister Grace, and he said DSS tried to have his parents arrested. He said when he got back from Italy, he was convinced Christina was sexually abusing her daughter. At this point, the prosecutor literally yells. One of the jurors was startled by that and kind of jumped, and they send the jury out. The prosecutor said that Zack is intentionally trying to taint the jury, says we're not going to ask for a mistrial, and the judge tells Zack, you cannot say anything about sexual abuse in your testimony. The state says based on the defendant's violations of your rulings, they want the judge to instruct the jury to disregard. The jury comes back in and the judge tells them that he determines what evidence can come in and what can't. They can't consider any testimony he's told them to disregard, such as the last comment by Zack. They move on to October of 2020 and say, you talked about 2 offers from John to kill Christina. And after the second offer, you told John you would never do that for money, but only if you believed it was necessary to rescue the child. And Zack says, if there was no other way. Did you conclude you had to rescue her and there was no other way? And Zack says, yes. In the beginning of October, he had finished that music project. Zack said his birthday was October 2nd, and he was having a private concert at the Wynn home. Shortly after, a friend reached out who had performed on a cruise ship and also recruits pianists to perform on these international cruise ships. So Zack interviewed and got the job on October 12th, and then he said maybe a little earlier. At the time, the Wynn family was in Europe. And the defense goes right into it. Did you take Christina's life? Yes. I believed it was absolutely necessary to save the child, and I was right. The judge tells the jury to disregard that comment. He said he had struggled with this since June and thought the child was in danger. What he did didn't work with writing to DSS, so he wrestled with knowing what he had to do. And by the time October 13th rolled around, he felt guilty he had waited as long as he did and that he should have acted sooner, but he didn't. So he got the offer to work on the cruise ship, but he said, I have an opportunity to save her from a danger I knew she was in, and it would not cease. He said, I couldn't leave her to drown. I've had a great life. I was going to the South Pacific to play music for rich people. But how could I leave her to that fate? That day, I believed there would be a period of time when Christina was all alone. And when I did it, I didn't want anybody there. He said this was not about revenge or retribution. All I felt was pity, and I wanted to make sure nobody else would be involved in this. He said he planned very carefully. If he tried to do this and failed, it would be worse for the child. I believe if I was discovered doing this, it would connect me to John, and he's a great father, and I still believe he's a good father and the best chance she has in life. He explains that he had a CWP and would always carry a 9mm for personal protection. But at first, he was going to shoot Christina. So he bought a .22 caliber revolver at a gun show here in Greenville about a month or a month and a half before the murder. He also bought a knife at that gun show. He said he got gloves and he got paint thinner just in case a glove broke or he left a fingerprint. He wanted to be able to clean that up. He looked at a route that he could take from the mountain house on the back roads to avoid traffic cameras. He looked at Google Maps and planned his route. He originally planned to do this on October 12th, the day before he actually murdered her. But he woke up that day and felt a reluctance, and something in his gut told him it wasn't the right day. So he waited until the next day. He said he found out where everybody would be on October 13th in the house from John. He knew when the child would be at school, and he knew Christina had a job interview that morning. So on October 12th, he stayed at the mountain house. And then on the 13th, he said he left a little later than he wanted to, around 8:15 a.m. in his truck with his bike in the bed of that truck. They have the bike in the courtroom and show it to the jury. He said he put gloves in a backpack, paint thinner, the .22, a knife, and a box that was made to look like a gift. It was a wrapped box. And a bunch of roses he bought the day before. He drove to a road that ran parallel to Canebrake. And on the ride, he said he knew the only way to save the kid was to kill Christina. But he said there is the human element that's so reluctant to take a human life. He said he prayed a lot about this and he knew logically it was right, but he was also reeling against it. Plus, she was a woman and he was raised to protect his sisters. That morning, he felt this was the right thing to do after he prayed. He didn't feel anger. He felt pity because this was the only way to save the child. He said he knew he had a duty to do this to save the kid. He said driving there, he was experiencing a very high level of anxiety and a physical illness he had never felt. He had sweaty hands, an urge to vomit. He was shaking a lot. But he was thinking, if I don't do this, I'm consigning the child to her fate when I know I could have done something to stop what was happening. When he parked his truck, he said the feelings got worse. He knew the plan, but he had so much difficulty actually going through with it. He took his bike out, he had a mask on, and he said, I was wearing the clothing that's been described already. I felt like all I could do was put one foot in front of the other. And he said he kept seeing her face, meaning the child. And if I don't do this, nobody will come to save her. He eventually arrived at the house and planned to use the gun, but decided not to because of the noise. He didn't want to alert a neighbor or a bystander who may come to investigate. He said he had made a homemade suppressor. And he said in the movies, it's made to look easy. He also bought subsonic ammunition because it's supposed to be quieter. But he says a silencer doesn't work on a .22 and it wasn't silent. He said he would have rather used the gun because it would have been quicker and more humane. So he arrives back at the house about a little after 9 a.m. and he's on his bike. He said he had on black pants, black thermals, a gray shirt over that, a black beanie, a mask, and black gloves, and a black backpack. Christina's car was in the driveway, and once there, he laid his bike in the driveway, took out the gift wrap box out of the backpack, and put the .22 in the box. He took roses and rang the doorbell. He said he was shaking and freaking out at this point. When he rang the doorbell, Christina opened the door. He said he had a delivery for her sister, and this was his way to make sure she wasn't there. Christina said her sister wasn't home, so at that point he knew it's just her. He handed her the roses, took the revolver out of the box and pointed it at her and said to be quiet and go inside. So he follows her in and shuts the door. He said at this point he didn't feel very in control of his body. He realized the gun was unloaded, so he planned to knock her unconscious. He said he tried to while he was holding the roses to hit her on the head. He said even though he knew who she was and what she was doing to the child and the danger the child was in, he saw a woman and he had been taught to protect women and children. He said his hand didn't really work when he was trying to hit her. It kind of just came back on its own and he said he barely hit her. He kept trying, the same thing would happen. And he said he couldn't bring himself to hit her. And she realized he was hesitating, so she tried to move herself away and fight back. During that time, the roses had dropped and the petals and the stems scattered. He realized if he didn't act soon, this was going to end up terrible for the kid because what was happening to her would not be uncovered. He said he realized he would have to force himself to do this at any cost. So he pulled out the knife that he was wearing and started striking her. But again, he said his hands were pulling back. The knife would make contact, but it wasn't inflicting anything that would have been fatal. And she was fighting him. She realized again he was hesitating and it became a struggle. He said he kept striking her with the knife and they fell to the floor. And he said he just took his mind out of it and wanted to finish it as quickly as possible because it was becoming prolonged. He doesn't remember how many times he stabbed her and she stopped struggling. He stood up. He said he was freaking out and in a daze. He was trying to figure out how to leave the house and not leave anything behind because he was afraid John would be connected to it, which would put the child in danger. He started to pick up the rose petals, but realized he didn't have time to do that. And at this point, he was just paranoid a neighbor may just come over. He moved her body away from the window so nobody would look in and see her, put the things back in his backpack, and he looked in a mirror and saw she had scratched his face in the struggle, and he knew it was very possible he could have left DNA. So he used the paint thinner to try and clean her hands. He changed his mask, took off his outer shirt because there was blood on it, put on his backpack, and he was worried her sister or Bradley Post may come over, so he tried to leave as quickly as possible. He realized he probably left DNA in the house, and he prayed again and said, I'll own up to it if I'm caught because it's the right thing. He got on his mountain bike and pedaled back to the truck and drove back to the mountain home. This is where it all hit the fan. He said he felt relief because he knew the child would be safe from the sexual abuse her mom is perpetrating on her, and the state is hiding it from you. Tell you what, the prosecutor actually started objecting before he finished the sentence, so it was kind of a shouting match to see who could be louder. And the jury is sent out. The state said he is a disgrace to the court's rules. This was intentional. He's been warned 3 times and he has no intent to follow the rules in this courtroom, and he's waiving his rights. The state said the defense needs to control their client, and the judge says there's no indication the defense knew what he was going to say. The state says at this point they know Zack has no intention of following the judge's rules. The defense points out he has a right to testify. We've made clear the instructions. He has a right. I'm doing my best. The judge says his right to testify can be limited without violating his constitutional rights. We take a long break. It was about an hour. So when we get back, the judge told Zack outside the presence of the jury that he found him guilty of contempt and sentenced him to 6 months in jail. Zack told the judge he understood. Around the second time that Zack blurted something out about the sexual abuse, the judge told Zack that he needed to abide by the ruling that you can't mention this. And Zack said, I will try, but I put my hand on the Bible to tell the truth. And the judge is like, don't mention it. So once the jury was brought back in after that extended break, which over that break, by the way, is when we found out John Melo had been arrested shortly after Zack testified about the money proposition and also telling him what would be the best time essentially to go kill Christina. So the last bit, after he left Canebrake, he rode his bike back to his truck and then went back to the mountain house. He disposed of the gun and the knife in a nearby lake and burned his clothes in a fire pit. At the beginning of November 2021, he got a plane ticket from Detroit to fly overseas for that job on the cruise ship. While he was at the airport in Detroit, he got a call that there were warrants for his arrest. So he rented a car, drove back to Greenville, and turned himself in. That was it for today's testimony. Like I said, y'all, probably the most chaotic and crazy day I've ever witnessed in court. 3 times he was warned, and then you had that big one because while the solicitor was objecting and trying to sort of drown Zack out, Zack got it out, and the jury was looking back and forth, but really, they definitely heard everything Zack said. The prosecution has said they definitely are not going to ask for a mistrial, and so he was found in contempt. But here's the thing: the judge instructs the jury. I decide what evidence comes in. You disregard that statement, but you can't put toothpaste back in a tube. And for a week now, this jury really has looked confused on things, especially every time they're sent out of the room when Bradley Post's phone is mentioned. I think they have a clear picture of what at least was going on with the child. Just a very crazy, crazy day in court. I'm going tonight to John Mello's bond hearing at the detention center at 9:30. So I'll try to update you guys tomorrow on that. That is it for today. We will be back in court at 9:30. The judge instructed the jury to be there at 10:30. We're going to have a few hours of some winter weather in the morning. And depending on how much we get, there's a small chance, I would think, we may not even have court tomorrow because we're going to be below freezing and we're not equipped for that. So I'll keep you posted on social media. I'll definitely do a YouTube short to keep you caught up. But that's it for today. Hope you guys have a good rest of your evening, and we will see you soon.